Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on So You'd Like to Propose a Session for IAI27. Today's webinar is being hosted by the International Association for Impact Assessment, or IAIA, assessment for making better and more informed decisions. My name is Keisha Blaser, and I will be facilitating today's webinar, though you will mainly be hearing from our presenter who you'll meet in just a moment. Now, this isn't quite applicable for this webinar, but if there's anything that you would like to share with your networks, you can see our tag there at IAIA Network, as well as a hashtag you could use. However, for this webinar, what might be more helpful is remembering that if you are an IAIA member, we do have the hub. So if there are any discussions that you would like to have after the webinar about something you heard here today, the hub might be a great place to do that. Now, before we get started, I'd like to just talk about a few of the resources you can find at our website, www.iaia.org. Now, off the top, if you haven't checked out our website in the past couple months, it's gone through a bit of a refresh, and I would love for you to check it out and see the new interface and the new resources we have there for you. So first, you can see a couple there. Two of our most recent ones are both on the role of AI in impact assessment that were very popular and also had some really, really interesting ideas shared during those. So please go check those out. There's also a variety of topics, including resettlement, social impact assessment, health, biodiversity, and more. So those are all available in our resource library, and you can even search by topic. Now, most of the courses that are open right now are happening in July, but we actually have a few courses running even through October that you can register for at the moment. So first we have the complexities of resettlement and livelihood restoration toward the end of July, and then a course on tools, excuse me, tools for stronger argument and clearer writing at the end of July into the beginning of August. If you have any questions on those courses or would like more information, please check out our website, or you can also contact me directly. Then we also have online training and mentorship available through our professional development program. We have two courses in this program, one on social impact assessment and one on the foundations of environmental impact assessment. The next offering of these courses will both be in September, and registration will be open soon for those. Next, we also have on-demand micro-learning modules, which are about 30 to 60-minute courses on different sectors and how they pertain to strategic environmental assessment. So we have courses on hydropower, solar power, tidal power, and several others. So please go check those out. And then finally, we also have a variety of free downloadable publications, like our best practice principles, our IAFAST tips, and more. So again, all of that is available at www.iaia.org. Now, before we get started, the majority of today's webinar is going to be time for questions from the audience. And so on your GoToWebinar panel, you can actually type your questions into the questions tab, and then me and the presenter will go through those at the end during the Q&A. We will have a couple poll questions here starting shortly, so just be aware that those are going to pop up on your screen for you to answer. And then we also will have the presentation available, again, in that resource library. So if you would like to view this afterward, perhaps as you present or prepare your session to submit, library along with the presentation. Okay, now before I turn it over to Jack, I'm going to get a couple of those polls going like I mentioned. So the question will come up on the screen for you, and I will give you about a minute for each question. If you could please go ahead and choose which of the answers. So the first one is, have you attended an IAIA annual conference in the past? about 10 more seconds here. If you haven't answered the poll yet, go ahead and put in your answer here. Perfect. Okay, so it looks like the majority of us, 65%, have actually. Okay, we'll go to our next one. So of those of you that have attended an annual conference, sorry, one second, have you ever presented at an annual conference before? So if you have not attended, if you're one of those, you can just put no here too. I could have put not applicable. So please let us know if you have presented at an annual conference in the past. Perfect. Okay, most of you have already voted, so I'm going to end this one early. Again, the majority of you, 76%, have not presented at an annual conference. So hopefully this session will be really helpful to have you learn some of the tips and tricks from Jack and from some lessons we've learned along the way. Okay, next one here. So even if you have not actually presented at an annual conference, have you ever submitted a session proposal for an IAIA annual conference? Perfect. Again, it looks like you all are very fast on this question, so I'm going to end this one a little early. So it looks like the majority, about 86% of you have not submitted a session, and maybe that's from having some of these questions that we're going to go over today. So hopefully we can help, and if you do have interest in submitting one, this will be very helpful for you. Okay, sorry, we just have a couple more. I think we have one more after this one. Yes, no, or if you have not ever submitted, you can go ahead and click the NA option. But for those of you that have submitted a session, the majority of you did have it accepted, which is great. Okay, I believe this is our last question. Thank you for participating. This helps us kind of gauge what the audience is at for our questions and how to gauge their presentation. So if you have chaired a session at an IAIA annual conference, did it go as you hoped and expected? Answers? Perfect. Thank you all for participating. I appreciate it. Okay, so with that, I am going to hand things over to today's annual conferences and has chaired or co-chaired sessions in various formats at 9 different conferences. He served as a member of the Technical Program Committee for IAIA19 in Brisbane, and he served on the Technical Program Standing Committee from 2024 to 2026 and chaired the committee for IAIA26 in Quebec. So with that, Jack, over to you.
Thank you very much, Keisha. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, according to wherever you all are. And special welcome to anybody who is from time zones like Vancouver or Christchurch who are somewhere in the small hours of the morning. So great to have you with us. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, pardon me, who are the traditional custodians of the land where I am, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to any participants from First Nations who may be taking part in this webinar. So, yeah, I guess why me? Well, I've been to 11 conferences, as Keisha said. I've chaired sessions. I've looked at session proposals at for the last 3 conferences in terms of being on the standing technical program committee, and I also served on the technical program committee for the conference when it was held in Brisbane in 2019. The first IAIA conference that I went to was in Perth in 2008. And I thought then that was the best conference of any sort that I had ever been to. And a big part of that was because of the really impressive variety and diversity of types of sessions, much more engaging than I had experienced at other organisations' conferences, and I really enjoyed the many opportunities to contribute actively from being in the audience. So if we go to the next one, Keisha, this webinar is about session proposals primarily. So a session proposal is very different from a presentation abstract. If your primary wish is to give a presentation on your research or on an interesting case study, then the call for abstracts will come later in the year, and that's what those sorts of proposals, that's where those sorts of proposals belong. All the IAIA conferences have session time slots of 90 minutes. The rooms are generally arranged in either theatre style or with round tables with about 10 seats to a table. And all the supporting stuff is there. The AV is there, the laptop, the lectern, a table for your presenters, because even for paper sessions, the panel discussion, the Q&A with the presenters after the formal presentations is often one of the best parts of the session. And if you're thinking of a session that might want something different, then that's something you need to be thinking about at the proposal time. So it's also important to remember that this is the conference is for the participants. It's not just for the presenters. So sessions need to be planned in the context of having broad appeal to the sort of audience that will be there, which is an international audience. So if you've got an idea that has a very strongly local or even national flavour, maybe that's something that would be better to target a national conference rather than IAIA. If you are thinking of putting in a session proposal, do you have a co-chair? Do you have someone who will work with you on the proposal? You can have more than one co-chair. It can be really helpful to work with someone else. They can provide some different insights. They can give you a broader mix of ideas about how to frame the proposal, and they will also, having more than one person gives you access to a broader network for engaging others in the session. So sessions can be they're open or they're closed or they're by invitation. So that's a signal, that relates to the presenters. Even if you are proposing an open paper session or panel session, think about possibly approaching workers whom you know in your field of interest and encourage them to consider submitting an abstract. You need a minimum number of accepted abstracts for a session that has made it through the first stage and got onto the preliminary program to stay on to the final program. If you get more abstracts than you need, that's fine, because you may finish up then having a session that runs over more than one time slot. But if you don't have enough, then the session will finish up dropping off the program. And the other thing to bear in mind is that you can, as a session chair, you can submit an abstract to present in your own session. That's the only way in which the conference allows people to have more than one appearance. So if we go to the next one, we'll look at the types of sessions. So at IAIA26 in Quebec, it's quite small. I hope it's clear enough for you on your screens, but you can see that almost half of the accepted sessions on the final program were paper sessions, and there were a number of panel sessions, but something like a third of the total number of sessions were of an interactive type. And as I said, one of the things I loved about IAIA in Perth, and I've enjoyed at all of the IAIA conferences I've been to since, is the diversity of session types and the opportunity to participate. There's a session type called a debate that we didn't have any debates on the program in Quebec, and there were no Pecha Kucha sessions in Quebec. There were a couple that were approved at the preliminary program stage, but they didn't get enough abstracts to make it onto the final program. So if we go to the next one, I'll sort of dive into the session types a bit more. The paper session is the simplest type of session. It's a conventional, usually PowerPoint, series of PowerPoint presentations. It's the most familiar type of session for most people, I guess, and it's the most there are more, or in my experience, there are usually more proposals for paper sessions than for any other type. But that also means that a paper session proposal may be more likely to duplicate a proposal that someone else has put in, and that may mean that it might not make it through. Panel sessions have shorter presentations, usually only 5-minute presentations. There's more focus on exchanges of ideas between the panelists and between the panel and the audience. So for a panel session, you need presenters who are able to be disciplined in terms of being succinct. Then maybe if we go to the next one, Keisha, now, a workshop, we're getting into the interactive types of sessions. So workshop is interactive. It looks to engage and draw upon the expertise in the room to illuminate whatever the issues are within the topic. A solution room is a particular type of workshop targeting development of a solution to a specified problem or problems. A World Cafe is another different specific form of workshop where participants move from table to table to progress discussions building on the work of earlier groups at each table. So there's a table host that stays in place and manages that succession of discussions. So for those sorts of sessions, you need to make sure that you arrange for capable people to act as facilitators or table hosts who understand the format. A game, that's some sort of a structured competition designed to explore or illuminate some particular IA challenge. The session that Tanya Burdett and I ran in Quebec this year took the form of a game. That was good fun. Pecha Kucha is a particular form of paper session with presentations limited to 20 slides that each go up for 20 seconds. So each presentation is only a bit over 6 minutes. It's a challenging format, and if you want to go with a Pecha Kucha session, you need to make sure that you've you will have enough presenters who understand the format and are willing to operate within that. A debate is teams or individuals arguing opposite perspectives on some issue, and then there are other types. There is flexibility also if you have an idea that doesn't quite fit into one of those categories. There's flexibility to put in something as another type and explain that on the proposal. So if we could go to the next one, please, Keisha. I guess this is a competitive process. It's like, the World Cup's on at the moment. The session proposal process is competitive, and it takes place in a strongly international context. So the venue will have a finite number of rooms for concurrent sessions, and the conference format will have 11 time slots in which concurrent sessions can be held, plus one for perhaps 4 theme forums. So what that means is if for argument's sake the venue has 12 suitable rooms, there's up to 12 concurrent sessions. So the likely maximum number of sessions that can be accommodated on the program will be about 132, maybe 4 theme forums as well, so say 136. So if more than 136 proposals come in, some will necessarily have to be rejected just due to lack of capacity. If there are a couple of proposals that are very similar, it's likely that the best of them may be accepted and others rejected. If you're looking to be as competitive as you can, bear in mind that IAIA, in my experience, has always been supported diversity of session types. So an engaging, innovative sort of proposal may have an advantage over more conventional sessions dealing with the same sort of topic. You also need to bear in mind that it is an international conference, that the audience will come from all over the world. I can't remember how many countries were in Quebec, but probably 80 odd. So you need to think about appealing to and attracting an audience in that context when the audience will have a dozen different options in terms of each time slot. So sessions, in particular sessions with a limited geographical focus, are less likely to be supported compared with sessions that have an unrestricted geography or at least a regional or continental appeal, say Africa or Latin America. But something that is tightly focused on a single country is less likely, and certainly if it's tightly focused on something smaller than that, a single province or a state, that probably belongs at a different conference. Even if your own experience is at a particular local level, think about how to frame a proposal to attract abstracts and an audience from across a wider area. When you're filling in that session proposal template, it gives you 300 words to say what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve. So use those 300 words wisely. If we go on to the next one, please, Keisha. There are some ways in which you can try to give a session proposal a competitive advantage. The conference has a theme, and the theme is enabling. It's not restrictive, but it can provide a useful hook. So for Christchurch, the theme is looking back for the future of impact assessment. So you could draw that into any proposal that is around, for instance, review of past practice, history of some standard element of impact assessment. What are the lessons of the past? So in your proposal, explain how it interfaces with or explores or advances discussion around the conference theme. You can still have a proposal that is not particularly tightly focused on the conference theme, and there will be sessions of that nature, but if you're looking for an advantage, tying it into the theme is a good start. Every IAIA section has the opportunity to submit a session proposal for a guaranteed place on the program. So if you've got a proposal that's got a strong interface with one of the IAIA sections, you could consider engaging the leadership of that section. But you should note also that some of the sections, especially the larger ones, might already have selected their endorsed proposal. Think about ways that you can make your session, your proposal, a bit special, give it even a unique touch. So that might be something like use of an online voting system, interactive voting system, to develop a solution to a problem with audience participation. You might have a session which targets a particular product outcome, such as a new draft fast tips document. Or you might include showcasing some unusual or new form of audience or stakeholder engagement. So something that just makes your proposal a bit different from the others. And in terms of engagement, think about how you will look to draw your audience into the session. Because the reality is that many conference attendees want to give. They don't just want to be passive receivers. I always think that there is, in any session, that there's more expertise in the audience than there is up the front. In terms, those are some things to think about trying to do. Turning it around, some things to try and avoid, and this will be the last slide. Thanks, Keisha. And these are sort of taken from the general thrust of comments that the Technical Program Committee made last year on session proposals, which scored below the threshold for inclusion in the preliminary program. So as I said, if there's duplication, if there is more than one proposal, especially around a fairly broad or too general a sort of topic, probably the best one will get through. But when the conference has people interested in a whole range of things, so it's unlikely that there will be multiple sessions with very similar descriptions that will make it into the final program. So if you put in a proposal around climate change, for instance, you need to think, what's the specific aspect of climate change, and what impact assessment related aspect of climate change are you looking to address? As I said, if a proposal is too narrow, it may serve better as an abstract than as a session. So some proposals, certainly last year, looked like they could make a very good paper, but were not broad enough to be a whole session. Proposals that cover familiar ground without offering anything new. Where people in impact assessment know what a lot of the problems are, because they're global and they apply across many jurisdictions. But for the conference, it's better to have something that is actually looking at something new, some new perspective, some way forward. Likewise, session proposals which just restate a problem. Try to work in some indication of how the session would work towards finding, or at least illuminating, a way forward. Be thoughtful about language, and I know that IAIA operates in English, which for people like me is a massive benefit, and it is challenging if you're putting a session proposal together in something which is your second or third language. So try to avoid overly technical, too much jargon. Maybe get a non-technical friend to read a draft of your proposal and see if it makes sense to them as you would like it to be understood. So use that as a bit of a filter to try and make sure that when your proposal lands on the screens of the Technical Program Committee, that you can be confident they're reading what you want them to understand. Don't put in session proposals that are essentially focused on a single proprietary product, like for instance a new model. For those sorts of things, probably better to think about a sponsorship or having a booth at the conference. And finally, if you've got to make sure that your proposal is framed in the context of impact assessment. If it doesn't have an impact assessment connection, this is probably not the right conference. That's pretty much it from me in terms of the presentation. So I'm happy to take questions, Keisha, if there have been questions coming in.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jack. I have quite a few questions that I can get started with, and I know that you might have touched on some of these. There are a couple that I know you did, but there were a couple brief times that you cut out a little bit. And so just to make sure everyone caught your answer, I want to just kind of make sure that we go over those.
Yeah, sure.
So first off, I know you answered this, but just to restate, because I'm sure you get this question a lot, can people submit an abstract and present in their own session?
Yes, they can. That's the only way in which you can essentially appear on the program twice, as a chair and as a presenter in the session in which you're chairing.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Now, why have you, Jack, mostly chosen to submit proposals for interactive sessions?
I think primarily because, as I said, I think at any IAIA session, there's more expertise in the room than up the front. And I feel like that's a way of drawing people in and drawing that expertise out into the open. I also, I guess I feel that it's a shame to get a whole bunch of highly skilled, highly experienced, highly expert people together and then just sit them down and tell them stuff. I think I remember a colleague here once saying to me that if you give a presentation at a conference and 6 months later someone from your audience can remember one thing you said, then that's you're actually ahead of the average. But if you go to a session and you had fun, you enjoy the session, and the interactive ones are the ones where people often have fun, those will stay with people. They'll remember that. And I know that people still talk to me about some of the sessions at conferences years ago. So that's the reason that I like that as a way of just offering an opportunity for people to put their own insights on the table rather than just sitting and being passive.
Perfect. Yeah, like you said, it's not that other sessions aren't great as well, but those are the ones that I hear about the most from other participants is those interactive ones. Now,
Yeah.
kind of speaking of that, when you were going through the different different types of So could you briefly just clarify again what?
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, I
Right.
missed the question, Keith. It froze up.
Let's see. Okay, I think we're back. Okay.
Yes. Yep.
So just like that, I think you froze a little bit during the solution. Sorry, I apologize, everybody. We're having a bit of just kind of freezing between the two of us here, but it session types during the solution room, you froze a little bit. So could you just clarify what the solution room session looks like?
Yeah, it's and I've never run a solution room, but my understanding of the way a solution room, to think of a solution room as a specialized type of workshop session. So it's a workshop session where there is a particular problem or challenge that has been identified, and the workshop is structured around trying to build a collective response or solution to that problem.
Perfect. Okay, the ending I got a little cut out, but that was great.
Yeah.
Okay, another question that just came through is someone's asking if they can submit a combo of paper presentations, say 3 for 10 minutes each, followed by a panel discussion for 60 minutes. So can you submit a combo like that?
And it sounds like essentially a variation on the panel discussion format. And I think the difference between a panel discussion and a paper session is the amount of time, or the split of time between the presentations and the more interactive part, which may include discussion between the panelists as well as discussion between the panel and the audience. 3 is probably not quite enough. I think the target this year for panel and paper sessions is 4 as a minimum. But I think there is scope for making a case for doing something which is more or less in line with one of the session types, but has some variation. So I wouldn't rule that one out, but the thing is, if you're going to have 4 and they're going to speak for 10 minutes each, and you've got your intro at the beginning, you're starting to lose that discussion period, which is an important component of a panel discussion. And certainly for whether it's a panel with a 5-minute or a panel with maybe slightly longer presentations or a pecha kucha, there's a real challenge there for session chairs to make sure that your presenters understand the discipline that they have to abide by in order for the session to work as you wish it to. And there, I'm well aware that there are people who are coming to the conference having had an abstract accepted, who are still doing their PowerPoint when they're on the plane on the way over, and haven't necessarily done the practice in front of the bathroom mirror to make sure that they're within the time. So that's a challenge for session chairs generally, to make sure that however you want your session to run, whether it's a paper session or whatever, that the people who are involved in the session understand the rules and understand the discipline.
Perfect. Thank you. I heard from someone in the audience that I'm the one that keeps cutting out, so I will do my best to get my questions out, Jack. But if I need to. Okay, right there. I think I froze again. Okay. So, you talked about some tips like not using too much jargon and speaking very clearly, but kind of just speaking to that, how can people explain their session ideas effectively?
How to explain them effectively? In the reality is that the session proposal process is a written process. So there is a template. Anyone who knows me knows the challenges that I have with IT, but I have been able to navigate it. So hopefully everybody can navigate it. But it's quite there's an automated cutout in each of the boxes at the upper limit of the permissible number of characters or the permissible number of words. So what I would normally do with a session proposal is that I'll write it in Word, and if I've looked at the template, I haven't yet looked at this year's template, but I'm presuming it's 300 words as it's been for the last several years. use the word counter to make sure that you've got everything into the 300 words so that you're not then pasting something into the box that stops halfway through an uncompleted sentence. And use that, as I said, I think it's, especially if you haven't done it before, or if you're working in a language that is not your first language, get someone else to have a read of what you've written, and ask them questions to make sure that they have understood what you've proposed in the way that you would like the technical program committee to understand it. So we've all had the experience of writing something and thinking that, that's nice and clear, and then finding that someone else who reads it has a completely different idea of what you're getting at. So use that, use your friends, use your family. Don't necessarily use your work colleagues, because they'll have the same, potentially they'll have the same jargon in their heads, but use other people. 300 words, it's not a big thing to read. That's the critical part to my mind. The bit that I spend time on trying to get right is that 300 word, what is your proposal? The other bit that I think is important, not necessarily in terms of the initial filter by the technical program committee, but in terms of attracting an audience, is try and think of a nice catchy title, something which is going to engage people's interest or curiosity or whatever, and get them through the door. Because, as I said, it is competitive. There will be, well, I don't know how many there'll be in Christchurch, but there were the best part of 1,400 people in Quebec, and in every time slot, they had 14 choices, 14 sessions to choose from. So it's up to everybody who's running a session to try and present the session on the program in a way which is going to make it appealing to an audience, which is trying to say, well, that one looks good, that one looks interesting, that's a topic I'm interested in, that's a format I'd like to see. So it's down to everybody to try and make sure that you've framed your proposal in a way that people are going to want to come through the door.
Perfect. Thank you. Now, kind of shifting gears a little bit, I think this is for you specifically, Jack. What type of sessions do you prefer? So as both, yeah, which types of sessions do you prefer delivering, and which do you prefer participating in?
I try to, in terms of participating, I try to go to a mixture of session types at each conference. So I will choose some sessions because the topic is of interest. I will choose some sessions because the format is of interest, or because I've been to sessions run by that session chair before and found them really engaging or really informative. So I do try to mix them up, and especially if I see a session proposal on the program that is different from anything I've seen before, then I may well choose to go to that one. I will always, I'm like most people at the conference, I think I have marks against 3 or 4 or 5 different sessions in each time slot, and I'm tossing mental coins at the end to try and work out which one to go to. And it's part of the appeal of IAIA conferences that's the challenge you've got, rather than trying to work out whether there's even one. There's always more than one. In terms of the types that I like to run, or in most cases, I have worked with a co-chair. I've worked with different different people at different times over the years, but I've worked recently quite a lot with Tanya Burdett, who has great expertise in things like public participation. So that's a lens that I'm interested in, but I don't have that technical expertise. So working with Tanya collectively, we've got more to offer between the two of us than either of us would have alone. We've done a number of sessions that have had at least a hypothetical element. So we sort of construct a scenario that is fictional but may look a lot like elements of the real world that many people will be familiar with, but it creates a safe space where you can explore the tensions that happen in the real world without the risks that go with actual case studies, where you might have people who are unhappy or people feeling like what's being done in the real world at some point is being criticised. And with those types of sessions, it usually involves having a panel of presenters who are essentially role players. So they take on roles in this hypothetical scenario as the proponent or the minister or the newspaper editor or whatever, and they will generally play those roles in a somewhat larger than life manner to try and highlight the differences, because those different perspectives and the different places that people are coming from is a big part of the tension that exists in any real life impact assessment situation. So those, I'm trying to think, what do we do? We ran a game with a hypothetical scenario in Quebec. In Bologna, we ran a sort of workshop that was aimed at developing a demarcation statement, because the theme in Bologna was around artificial intelligence. So we were trying to we used the session to develop or to draft a statement of the role of human impact assessors and the role of AI in good impact assessment. In Brisbane, where the conference theme was around evolution or revolution, we ran a debate under the title of Charles or Che. So we had essentially Charles Darwin arguing the evolution side of, that the way forward for impact assessment was to continue to evolve, and the Che side was putting the case that we need a revolution, we need to throw it all up in the air and start again. So, and all of those, I guess, come back to that notion that the theme, the selected conference theme, gives you a hook. If you can frame your proposal in a way that makes it clear to the program committee, the technical program committee, that this is a session which will respond to the theme and help to advance thinking or at least discussion around the theme, then that's probably a box ticked that helps you with that competitive advantage.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, we have time for a couple more questions here still. First, and this is again kind of shifting gears, but can you explain the role or responsibility of a session chair?
So the session chair, it's a role which has different responsibilities at different times. First of all, you've got to, well, as a proponent of a session, you've got to frame that proposal. You've got to submit that by, I think, the end of July this year. You need to develop a plan for how you are going to make your session work. In some cases, for a paper session, that might not need to be terribly complicated. For more interactive types of sessions, you really got to put some thought into it. And then you also need to get yourself to the conference. So if you're going to chair a session, you've got to be there. And depending on things like arrangements you may need to make with your employer to get yourself sent there, whether the country that you come from or whether you need a visa, or what sort of paperwork you need to be able to travel to where the conference is. Some of those things need thinking about early in the piece. You need to be able to be registered for the conference by the registration deadline for session chairs and presenters, because otherwise you won't be on the final program if you haven't confirmed that you will definitely be there. Then when you're at the conference, you've got to make sure that 90-minute time slot is used as effectively and productively as possible. So that means having a running sheet. As I say, for a paper session, the running sheet might be fairly straightforward. I'll spend 5 minutes doing an introduction. I've got 4 presenters. They're going to speak for 15 minutes each. That's 65 minutes. And then we've got 25 minutes for questions. That's all fine, as long as your presenters can count to 15. So one of the things that I think is quite important is to make sure that you have a strong communication line with your presenters, and that they understand how that time is to be partitioned, what you're looking for from them, what you think the audience is looking for from them. And I keep coming back to that thing. If the audience remembers one thing in 6 months' time, then probably frame your presentation in such a way that you choose the one thing you want them to remember and make sure it stays in their head. But with the sort of more interactive sessions that I've been involved with, we will usually try and have all the people who will be playing roles or whatever, meeting often after the opening reception, but we will have had conversations and email exchanges over a period of months. But then we will have at least one sit down together before the session to make sure that everybody has the same understanding of how the session's intended to run, what their part in that is, and what they need to do to make that work. So trying to minimize the risk of surprises during that 90 minutes is important. I think there's an expectation if it's a paper session and or a panel session and you are one of your own presenters, that you will go last. And that I guess provides a little bit of an incentive to make sure that everybody else stays within time and leaves enough for you. We've all been to sessions where the first 2 speakers have left about 15 minutes for the last 3, and that's those sessions are frustrating. So be prepared to be an assertive timekeeper, and make sure you've explained to your presenters that you will be an assertive timekeeper, and that part of their role is to make sure that they can say what they intend to say in the time that they've got available.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was very helpful. Time for a couple more. One that just came in from someone in the audience here. Does IAIA reimburse presenters for their travel?
For their travel? No, is the short answer. Everybody who wishes to be a a session chair or a presenter needs to be able to make their own way there. Now for many employers, the fact that your name will appear on the program as a presenter or as a session chair, that's what they will need in order to say, yes, we will dip into the company's coffers and send you to the conference. But everybody who is at the conference as a presenter or as a session chair has got there under their own steam or their employer's steam.
Perfect. Thanks, Jack. Another probably semi-quick one. Do people have to be IAIA members?
No, not to. You don't need to already be a member of IAIA in order to submit a session proposal, or indeed to submit an abstract when abstracts are called for later in the year. I guess, in one sense, the opportunity to be on the program for the annual conference is a recruitment opportunity for IAIA. And the fact that the conference is in a different part of the world each year makes it accessible for a cohort of people who might not be able to get to the conference when it's on the other side of the world. So no, you don't need to be a member already. Having said that, I would obviously encourage people to be a member, because there are benefits to being a member that are well beyond whether you submit a session proposal or an abstract or not.
Perfect. Thanks, Jack. I believe that's all. Sure you touch on or include here before we wrap up.
Look, I think the only other thing I would say, there are a couple of gateways that a session proposal has to get through. You need to satisfy or convince the technical program committee that your proposal ought to be on the preliminary program in the context of the number of spots that they can accommodate. But then you also, the fact that something is on the preliminary program doesn't automatically get it onto the final program, because you've got the gateway of your minimum number of abstracts if your session is of a type that requires those sort of presentations. And that's where I'd say, even if you're proposing an open session, if you know of some people working in that general field who might be good presenters, I would be working the emails a bit to try and be confident that there will be at least enough abstracts coming in to keep the session alive. And bearing in mind that if you, and this happened in Quebec, and it's happened at other conferences, there were sessions which were accepted and which then attracted a dozen or more abstracts, and those sessions finished up running across multiple time slots. That's an extra challenge for the session chair, because it's always nice to get to the end of your session and think, now I can relax. And if you get to the end of your session and think, well, I got through that one, I've got 2 to go, that can be a bit more challenging, but you will really enjoy a drink that night. And then the other thing is making sure that you can get yourself to the conference and you can get yourself registered by the time of that deadline. So there's a few things you need to be thinking about as time passes beyond just the deadline for putting the proposal in.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Jack. I think with that, we're going to wrap up here. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. That was very helpful. As someone myself who's not very involved in the session proposal process and in that world, this was very helpful for me, and I'm sure for all the participants as well. And everyone that joined too, thank you so much. We know your time is valuable and we really appreciate you spending some time with us here today. As you leave, there will be a brief survey for you to fill out. Please do so. If you have any questions that maybe you didn't think of in time to put in the questions for Jack, or that you think of as you leave, feel free to put those in there and I will get those to once you leave. If you think of further questions, feel free to email me as well, and I can get those questions to the right people to get you help in this process. And then a final reminder that this will be available in the and get through the submission process. You will have this video to kind of refer back to and check back to answer. Are so happy that you all spent some time with us today, and we will see you next time.
Thank you very
Goodbye.
much.
Yeah, goodbye.